So good morning, everyone. I'm so sorry. Sometimes technology just completely fails you. And as we've said a million times in this past year, when I'm the IT person, that does not leave us in great stead. So we pre-recorded this conversation live at 8:30 with Adam Martin from the F5 Project, and we're uploading it to you now. So watch and enjoy. Welcome, Adam.
Hi, Adam.
Hi, how are you guys?
Good, thank you.
We're good. Sweating it out like everybody else.
Well, I'm inside, so.
Well, we are too, kind of, but my blood pressure always goes up a little when we have technological issues. So I think I'm warmer than I would normally need to be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're so thrilled to have you joining us, Adam. So for anybody who doesn't know, Adam and I work in the same sector, the nonprofit sector, in really different avenues. But I have been a fan and follower of yours really since you launched onto the scene, Adam, because your work is so transparent and so necessary and so extraordinary. So why don't you start the way we ask all our guests to start, Adam, by telling us sort of your personal journey from wherever you want to start to here, and then we'll move into the F5 Project, because I want people to know all about the work you're doing.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you guys having me on today. I've been a fan, so that it's mutual. I guess my journey started probably, I don't know, it started much longer before the nonprofit journey did. So I had no intentions of starting a business or a nonprofit, even 6-7 years ago. So my intention was I was pretty good at sales. I was going to do tech. I was going to stay in the tech industry. I worked for a company local in Fargo for about 4 or 5 years, and my intention was that I was just going to be a lifer there and do the work. Prior to that, I had no career. I was in homeless shelters, detox treatment centers. I lived on couches. Bought I didn't even buy clothes. I don't even remember the last time I bought clothes prior to buying clothes now. It was usually a lot of hand-me-downs and a lot of eating out, because I didn't have anywhere to store food or pots and pans. So, and every once in a while, probably for 3 or 4 months, I would get a place to live. I'd get sober, or at least not use as much as I was prior. And I would finally get an apartment. Some sympathetic soul in recovery would let me rent a room from them. And that was kind of the cycle. I would eventually get kicked out because I'd start using, like binge using again, and bringing it and sneaking in into the apartment. And eventually I got a bunch of felonies on my record. I actually, the people that I robbed or I burglarized were people in recovery that owned a construction business. And he had given me a job like multiple times because I couldn't get a job anywhere because of my history, because of who I was. And so I stole a U-Haul and I broke into this construction company and I stole a bunch of laptops and computer, PCs, and I even stole the dilly bars out of the freezer. There was no plan. When I was drinking, it just went from a point of I was drinking to feel better, to I felt great, to I'm doing some really crazy stuff now. And that was probably that was a very defining moment in my life, was when I started robbing friends, right? Before it was people I didn't know or whatever. So went on the run, had 5 felony warrants for my arrest, had robbed a couple other places that night too, some in Moorhead and some in Fargo. So now I had warrants out in 2 different states, and went to jail. I finally got caught. And long story short, I didn't stay sober after that. It was about a year after that. It was about 2 years after that. I went to Teen Challenge for a little while and got out of Teen Challenge, and about a week later I was drinking again. And I just got to the point where it was I had no idea what I thought I was the exception to the rule. Like no matter how much effort I was going to put in, no matter if I believed in God or not, like old school recovery type stuff, like was, um, it worked for a lot of people. And I got to a point where I didn't think it was going to work for me. And so, uh, what happened for me was I had got fired from another job, and it was in the tech region, and I had updated my Facebook and said, I'm sober, I'm looking for a job, I'm looking for a place to live. And I think by this time my Facebook network was just like they were just done with it,
Yeah.
right? But I knew a guy who reached out to me. He even commented on there and said, hey, I know a place. And I knew where he worked at. It was another tech place, right? And I was just done with tech. I was done with sales. It was just too corporate-y for me. It was too whatever. And I was like, I think you need to reread the update. Like, I'm done with tech. And he was like, well, and he messaged me and he was like, you're done with tech because you worked for crappy places. So you should probably check this place out. And so I got suited up with, suit that I found at a thrift store. I, walked to the interview, which was a couple miles, and I saw the parking lot, and everyone had nice vehicles, and I was like, I can't wait for the day that I have a license. I can't wait for the day that I can actually have my own vehicle. Like at this time, I'm like 31 years old, right? And I was super nervous going into this interview. And I noticed that my shoes were really scuffed up, and I was like, I almost walked away from the interview. Like it got to the point in me trying to get sober where like there was so much trauma in the back, like prior, that like I had became a perfectionist about recovery, right? Like everything had to be perfect, and if it wasn't, it just triggered all these emotions in me, and I would just give up and go back to drinking, right? And I think a lot of people get to that point. And it's really baffling for a lot of people who don't experience that stuff, because then they see people going back out and relapsing and drinking. They don't understand why. And I just think that there's a lot of trauma in those early days, like that they're dealing with, that if it's not perfect, it's not ever going to work, right? That's just where you go. And I almost walked away from the interview, and I just had this like weird idea that if I put just an ounce of effort into my recovery as I do into drinking, like I might get some results. And I have to like be okay with not getting results right away, or getting the results that I want right away, right? And so, and I have to be willing to do things that other people aren't willing to do, because I had seen a lot of people die from addiction, and a lot of people die from alcoholism. And so if I have to wear crappy suits and scuffed up shoes, and like if I don't want to do those things, then I have to like if I don't, how do I put it? I used a banana peel to shine my shoe before I went into the interview. So like I have to be willing to do things that I wouldn't normally be willing to do, is what I'm saying. And for some reason, that like banana peel on my and shining my shoes, one, it worked, right? They were shiny, right? I mean, I could have used water. Like it didn't matter. Like,
Right.
and then two, like it gave me enough like um it gave me enough self-esteem to walk into the interview, right? Even though it was fake, like it's super fake, right? Like shining shoes is I should be grateful that I have shoes. That's what people would, you should be grateful you have shoes, right? And I get that, but like because of where I came from and because of like where I was trying to go, like I was almost to a point where I was like, I'm just gonna fake it till I make it. And the beautiful thing about doing that is I had like when I faked it, I felt like I was a part of what I was trying to accomplish, right? And so walked into the interview. There were like 8 people in this interview. I felt like I was being interrogated. I was super nervous, and the CEO was in that. It took, like it was just. But I had realized at that moment that like I had done things like this 1,000 times. I had jury trials. I had stood in front of judges. I had people saying that I shouldn't have freedom. I had people there that were advocating that I should have freedom. Like I had been through the justice system, and it was no different at this moment, except the titles and the details were different, and people were wearing different clothes, and nobody could send me to prison, right? And when that all kind of like weighed, like kind of fell on me, it just like felt like it just felt like I can do this. Like if I can stand in front of a judge and try and convince him not to send me to prison, which I've pulled off multiple times, I can convince the CEO of a smaller company to give me a job. And I would like, I don't know if it like that moment was like, it was like another defining moment for me, that like all the people that I'm surrounded with in the community were all in kindergarten at one time. Right? They were all in first grade. Like I was a jock in seventh and eighth grade, and I was a captain of and I was a quarterback, right? And then I got into high school, and like all those guys, like I look around town, they all have jobs, and I know that they used to be crappy kids at one time. And it just took all the expectation. Like I'm going and talking to people that used to just like have their brothers, their sisters, their fathers, or some, and instead of like CEO and felon,
Yep.
right? Like it just kind of wiped away all that stuff, and it just made things like super. I felt like I broke the matrix that day, and everything just became easier, and I became way more confident knowing that at one time we both sat across from each other in high school. Now we're just on other sides of the desk. So instead of thinking of it like this, like other sides of the desk, I thought about it like this. We're like side by side, and we have to figure out how we can make money together. You know what I mean? So that was my walk into recovery. I was 2 weeks sober when that happened. I'm now 8 years sober, and have since left that tech job, started a nonprofit. And that's a whole long story, right? Like it was like how that journey happened. I had no intentions of doing it, and it just kind of happened. And now we're 36 people strong across the state of North Dakota. We're in every city. My vision was to have people near every jail in North Dakota. That vision is pretty much there. And we provide services for people coming out of prison, coming out of treatment, coming out of Sanford for detox. So I believe that FI Project are reentry specialists. Not only that, but like social, like community reentry specialists, like getting people back into the community, not just getting them a job, not just getting them into recovery. So.
Well, that's extraordinary. So congratulations on 8+ years. That's no small feat.
Congratulations on starting a non-profit too.
Yeah, also no small feat. I don't ever tell anyone they should start a nonprofit. It's a beast.
No. I get people like who probably identify with me thinking they're like, well, if Adam started a nonprofit, maybe anybody can do it. And they'll always reach out to me and ask me, what should I do? Or should I start a nonprofit? And I'm like, man, it is literally the worst.
Yes.
Like the worst. Like you're not only you're not like in the nonprofit world. It's interesting because when I was in the tech world, I was only specifically competing, right, with other specific tech, like people who do the same thing that I do.
Yes.
In the nonprofit world, I'm going to be fully transparent. Like people don't like saying this or whatever, but it's true. You're competing with all the other nonprofits.
You and I are competing for the same community dollars. Yeah. Absolutely, we are. And and I mean, I think there's two sides to that coin. There's the competition piece, and there's also the you and I are building community from two very different angles. And how can the community better understand the value that we bring and support that because it benefits them? But that's a long sell conversation. It's not like here's a widget, buy it or don't.
Right.
So yeah, it's not easy. I say to people all the time, do not start a nonprofit, avoid it at all costs. And I believe in the sector, but it's a challenge.
Yeah, so, we probably could have, with where we're at today, I mean, 80% of our money or monies or whatever come from like a state contract or a city contract or whatever. We probably could have pivoted and turned it to a for-profit. My problem with it is that like there's still that 20% that kind of fills in the gaps, and our donors are just as important as any state contract, if not more important, because they're carrying us, on that. you know, but we could have turned it a for-profit and kind of just cut out that 20%, but we wouldn't be F5 today. We would be some
Yeah.
people that are just checking the box.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's a very different model. It's an amazing model, but
Yeah.
it's just not, we don't need a lot more nonprofits, I think. So you said a bunch of things that triggered all sorts of ideas for me. One is we had a woman on from Colorado at a treatment center named Michael Mazel recently, and she was talking about something that you said that really reminded me of this. She was talking about how she had her first drink, I think at 12 or 13, and she felt normal for the first time, felt like she belonged. And, you know, so she talked about this sort of anxiety. So when you were talking about walking into the room and having to get to that point where you could fake it till you make it, my point in that always is we all have to do that. Every funding meeting I walk into, I have to play some kind of character. Every instance I walk into as myself, if I'm in a space with people I think are better than I am or have more resources than I do or better education or whatever, I have to play that role until I can find myself comfortable enough to be there. So I'm going to ask you the question that I asked Michael, because I'm really fixated on this question and I don't think there's an answer. So I'm not looking for you to solve the question, but I'm wondering if you have thoughts on it. If you and I, if the three of us suffered from insecurity or imposter syndrome or, you know, feeling like we didn't belong at any point in our lives, how in the world did two of you choose to use a substance to try to mitigate that, and I did not? Do you have any thoughts on that question?
I can tell you from personal experience, right? Like, so like drinking for me, literally still to this day, has given me better feelings, better presence, better self-esteem, right? Like the stuff I have today is more quality, right? Like the self-esteem I have today is more quality than it ever was that alcohol produced. But alcohol, like like deep down in my core, alcohol does something different for me than it does for other people. It literally makes me feel like I'm more important, but humble, right? About it makes me feel like when I walk into the room, I'm supposed to be here and I'm supposed to be helpful. And I'm like, it does all the things that I've been trying to build to this day, right? Like that. The minute I take a shot, I'm a completely different person, right? So now when I'm 8 years sober and I walk into the room and I'm nervous and or I could be depressed, or somebody has some weird conversation with me right before I go up to stage and like give a talk or whatever, or some old person from my past decides to like want to attack me on Facebook or whatever, right? Like back in the day, like all I had to do was take a drink and I was a completely different person and I could handle it like however it needed to be handled, right? Or I could do whatever I needed to do. Now I have to like for me, like, you know, that part where in 8 Mile where Eminem's in the bathroom and he's like looking in the mirror before he goes up on stage and he's like super nervous. And then he just pops on stage and it just like everything goes away. Like he just owns the moment. That's his moment, right? For me, like it's very similar. Like I have to spend some time alone before I'm about to go into a situation, right? And depending on the situation, even in early sobriety, like I had conversations with my boss that like if we're like I'm in sales, alcohol plagues sales guys. I don't know if it's just a like salespeople are just all naturally like alcoholics and should be in recovery. Very similar to lawyers, but like we would go out in these functions and they would start having drinks. Drinking, watching people drink or like participating in the bar scene like early in recovery for me, like it wasn't that big a deal. Like seeing people have a few drinks never really bothered me. It's still to this day, it doesn't bother me. Like when Christy and I were living together, like, and she had her mom over or her grandma over, and they had a box of wine or something like that. Having even a box of wine in my fridge doesn't bother me, right? What's hard for me is when people start to get drunk, right?
Wow.
Because drinking was never the thing that really did it for me. It was being drunk that did it for me. You know what I mean? And so like when I'm drunk, like my whole life like changes. Like I feel like you know, when you're like flipping through the TV channels and you like old school TV channels, like now you just get a blank screen, but like you would get to that screen where you don't like Cinemax or something and you don't own it. So it was like just a snowy screen or something like that. Like that combined with like my mind being completely free at the same time. That was what alcohol did for me. It was like a spiritual awakening, you know, for me every single time I got drunk. So now, like when I walk into these situations, my mind, the way it's distorted, will think about that as soon as I start getting those feelings. You know what I mean? So how do I overcome that? Right? Like that's usually the follow-up.
Do you stay sober, Adam?
I know. Believe me, it's this is why I believe that I'm like I really believe that there's different categories, just like autism, right? There's a spectrum to autism. I believe that there's a spectrum to alcoholism, there's a spectrum to addiction, right? And this is why even in the recovery world, where I'll tell them, like, when you're like in your community and you hear a story of someone who went way far down the scale, a lot of times people will be like, well, maybe I'm not an addict, maybe I'm not an alcoholic, I don't do what he did, right? So there's even in that, like, we can't have a textbook necessarily for alcoholism or addiction or whatever, because even between those two worlds, people will be like, well, I did drugs, or you know some alcoholics out in California can smoke weed, right? Or some, like, there's no, so I'm to the point where like I don't really think that there's like an actual legit definition to alcoholism, addiction, or recovery, right? Other than what you're trying to achieve in your own life,
I think
right?
I think you have I think that's brilliant because I also, now I'm sober, I don't mind being around people who are drinking. I don't like people being around people who are drunk too. I know exactly what you mean there.
Do you really?
Yeah. I don't. I
It's a
love that. I
revelation.
love that. I love the fact that I can still go to a restaurant. Like when we went to England for my 50th birthday, and on my birthday, Dana organised a load of my old friends to meet in a bar, and they were all drinking. I was drinking non-alcoholic beer, and it was brilliant. But they never got drunk. They got a little tipsy. We had a fantastic time. But I've actually been around someone who's drunk, and it kind of completely unnerved me.
Yeah.
I'm shocked by this.
Yeah. I felt panicky. I felt I felt like I was going to get arrested for being with someone who was drunk.
Yeah.
I just, whoa, what am I doing? Get out, run.
Yeah. There's so many different variables when it comes to this, right? Like I think a lot of times when it comes to what we believe an alcoholic is, what we believe an addict is, and I might even like pissing people off by saying it, but I think that addiction and alcoholism are two different worlds, right? Like they're two different things, right? Because I've seen people who identify as addicts be able to drink. And I've seen people who identify as addicts who can't drink. And vice versa on the other side too, right? So it's like that's why I'm saying that what I think that there's multiple pathways, number one, to recovery. And I think there's multiple ideas of what recovery is. What it comes down to, it is what is your definition, what is your ideals, and can you maintain those, right? And it's all, I mean, like there's so many, like there's like a movement out in California where people, are calling it California sober, right? And they're not doing drugs anymore, they're not drinking anymore, but they're smoking weed, and it's a part of their recovery program. Do I think that's recovery? None of my business.
Yeah.
Right? When it comes down to it, it's none of my business. Would it work for me? No, I know it wouldn't work for me because I've tried multiple times in the past. We used to call it marijuana maintenance program, right? Back in North Dakota, and it did. And there's some people out there that can probably do it, right? I can't. It always leads me back to drinking.
Yeah.
anything that I am using to like adjust my mindset or to like change the way that I feel always leads me, because my body knows alcohol will do a much better job than any of those other things that I'm trying to use to control the way that I feel, you know. So that's a long answer to your question. Really, like, I don't even know if I answered it, but really what it comes down to is that, like, I believe that alcoholism or addiction, whatever you want to fill in the blank, is a lifelong journey,
Yeah.
right? And so there are some people out there that I met early on that got sober that are drinking today and not having any issues, right? That probably messes with me more than anything. You know what I mean? Because I see these guys that I got sober with, you know, even prior to me having long-term sobriety, like 15 years ago, they made it to like 14, 15 years sober. And then they decided that they were young when they got into recovery, and that they've matured and that they were going to go out. And I've seen people successfully do it. And I've seen some people like completely destroy their lives.
Yeah.
So like I'm at the point where I'm like, I don't even want to test it.
Yeah.
I don't even
That's-
like, there's a movement for non-alcoholic beer, like you brought up earlier, right? There's a movement for people in recovery to like participate and have those available options. For me, I don't even test it. I don't even want to test it. I don't even like the idea of a beer that looks like a Heineken that's like 0% alcohol in my hand, because it makes my stomach feel like there's butterflies driving race cars.
yeah,
And if
see,
it does,
I know what you mean, but I don't mind drinking the non-alcoholic beer because I used to mostly drink wine and bourbon,
yeah.
but I will
And this
never
is
touch a non-alcoholic bourbon.
right. And it works for you,
Yeah,
right? It works for you.
yeah.
For me, I don't even want to test it. I'm too scared to test it, right?
But I would never. I think I will never drink a real beer.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
don't want to. I don't want to run the
Yeah.
risk. And it might be, oh yeah, that's fine. I don't want to be in that position because I actually think for the last 4.5 years, my life has been absolutely fantastic, and I want to keep it the way it is.
Yeah.
I also know what you were talking about too. Someone once joked with me when I was in rehab. He said to me, "Guess you feel like an underachiever," because I said something, and the reason that conversation came about is because I was talking to these drug addicted alcoholics or alcoholic addicts or drug addict and alcoholic, and I'm just an alcoholic. And that's why I said I can't believe people you do both. Like you drink to straighten yourself up enough to take more drugs, or you take drugs to sober up to drink more alcohol. And that's when he said to me, "You feel like an underachiever because all you did was drink."
Yeah.
Blew my head.
I think so. Here's the thing, like, this is part of like in the recovery ecosystem, right? I think that this is part of like what I think treatment centers are awesome, right? But I also think they really did a piss poor job when it came to like helping curate recovery communities, right? And what I mean by that isn't, I don't think that they did it on purpose. I think that like they made it more clinical, like they tried to make recovery clinical, right? And so then we had terms like addict alcoholic or drug addicted alcoholic or polydependent, right? Or like
Yes.
substance abuse, whatever. Like there was just so many titles that happened that it created identities, right? So then you get into the community, and I mean, people were just like putting up barriers on where they could go or what they could do or whatever because of what their identity was. Like addicts were having a hard time connecting with alcoholics with that. But really, the titles and the details may be different, but like the process and the journey were going to be the same, right? But like they put too much emphasis on the title, so much so that even in prison, right, like out here, I've gotten crap for not ever being locked up long term in prison, and like help like it's I was like, so you're judging me because I'm helping people who are coming out of prison because I never spent a lot of time in prison. You know what I mean? Or you're judging me because I'm helping addicts, even though I don't identify as an addict because I'm an alcoholic. Like it's just like, and I think a lot of that mentality comes from the institutions, right? Because when you go to prison, what's the first thing they do? They make sure that you're an inmate, by the clothes that you wear, by the rules that you have to follow. So by the time you get out of there, you've identified as a felon. And then you come out into the community and you have a hard time applying for jobs or housing, even more because they're banning you because you're a felon. It only takes it only takes a certain, like, not that long a time for you to like completely fall into the idea of that's your identity now, right? To where you think about it, and every what, right, felon, addict, alcoholic, whatever, to the point where like we can't even like coexist in this ecosystem because now you have a mission to do this, or your identity is this. We did the same things the churches did, right?
Well,
and we're on that path.
I mean,
That's really interesting.
it's incredibly interesting, and I never want to sound like I'm minimizing any piece of this as someone who doesn't struggle with it, but in so many ways, Adam, it sounds like you're talking about junior high.
Mhm.
You know, so like I wasn't a cheerleader, so I didn't get to sit at that table. And I was a theater kid, but I moved in the middle of I moved between 9th and 10th grade. So I had to earn the right to get to be with the theater kid. And, I mean, there's just this, we seem to be built as a species to create hierarchies that you have to earn the right to be part of. And that once you're there, what you do is you look down at everyone beneath you and you say, well, you don't belong. Or you don't get to enter the party. And it's, from the outside, it feels like, well, how could anyone criticize the work that you're doing? You're trying to expand the definition of community. But of course, there are people criticizing from both outside and inside because it's what we do.
Yeah,
In my
natural.
world, it's this. Well, are you a real artist? What the hell does that even mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? Am I a real artist? Am I a human being and I make stuff? Then yeah, I'm an artist. I'm so fascinated by this. Okay, so I feel like we could talk for 42 hours, but you have a life and things to get to. But I definitely want to cover this because I didn't know anything about it until we connected on LinkedIn. Talk to us about this ugly grace
yes.
idea, because it's so spectacular. And I want to make sure that if people want to support it, they have
Yeah.
the opportunity to.
Cool.
So talk to us about that, please.
I get so many I've gotten more crap about ugly grace or more inspiring messages because of it. I never like when I came up with it, I'm going to be fully transparent. This is something that I've known for a long time. It was called something different. It was called inconvenience, right? Like inconvenient grace. And it was taught to me early in my recovery, like many recoveries ago, like when I was trying to get sober, that we do more for others than we do for ourselves, right? It's straight biblical.
Yep.
Right? Love your neighbor as yourself. Well, what does that mean? It means that I do the same things for them that I would do for myself, right? I clothe myself, I feed myself, I go to work to make sure I have money, right? I shelter myself, because I love myself. Really, at the end of the day, I love myself more than anyone else. Even if I'm having suicidal thoughts, I still take the time in the past to make sure that I'm eating, right? Like I take care of myself as best I can. There's times in my life where I was not doing a very good job, but I still made sure that I slept underneath a tree because I didn't want to get rained on. Like I still did things for myself. And so in my opinion, like when you hear that commandment, love yourself, love your neighbor as yourself, that's what it means, right? So like, because of people in my life who let me sleep on their couches, gave me rides to work, answered the phone at 2:00 in the morning, right? And they showed me that grace, the beautiful grace, right? I'm sober today. But there's a level of work and effort and inconvenience that goes into that grace. So I'm not like when I say ugly grace, I'm not saying grace is ugly. I'm saying that there's a form of work that goes along with that grace, right? The ugly work of grace, right? It could have been 4 words: ugly work, beautiful grace, but that's really hard to market. You know what I mean? So, so I called it ugly.
It's a really long
Yeah. So that, yeah. So I, So we call it ugly grace. And I didn't realize it was going to pick up as fast as it did. Right. But once I explained it a few times, people were like, holy cow, like when I want to be graceful, I want it to be convenient. I
Yeah.
want to be able to give a homeless guy on the street $20 and walk away. I want to be able to, volunteer at some, nonprofit one time and then move on with my life. I want to be able to, listen to a message in church about how other people are doing it. And then maybe if their opportunity arises, I'll do something. Right. Like I'm not condemning or anything like that. What I'm saying is that because of ugly grace in my life, I was able to get into recovery and replicate that 1,000 times over. I also want to clarify that ugly grace has nothing to do with the person that you're helping. It has to do with the inconvenient battle within yourself of, should I be a perfect example? Everybody sees somebody walking down the street that probably has a big backpack or whatever, right? And for good reasons. There's probably there's people that should never pick that person up, right? Like maybe we don't know who he is, right? Like that's what I'm talking about, is like we don't know who he is, we don't know what he's done. He could be a sex offender, he could be a rapist or a murderer or whatever. And we hear about those stories in the media all the time. So then it puts fear into people to like want to be helpful, right? I'll tell you, every time that I'm probably batting maybe 600, 700, right? I'm not perfect on it, but when I see a guy on the side of the road walking that looks like he needs a ride, I'll pull over and ask him if he needs a ride. The time that it's the hardest is when I'm running late to a meeting.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. That's the ugly grace right there. That's the ugly effort. Because like I try to imagine, whether the people listening to your podcast are Christian or Jewish or Muslim or whatever, like that isn't important to me. I believe that Jesus was the greatest criminal justice reformer of all time, right? Like all time. Like so much so that like when he was calling Pharisees out on their behavior, he was also doing it to the sinner at the same time, right? Like he was calling everybody out. And I feel like me getting into criminal justice reform world is like, I'm saying, whoa, prison reform, social reform, all this stuff. You guys got to stop doing that mugshot reform. And then when I'm spending time with the people we serve, I'm like, listen, you got to stop breaking the law.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I'm calling everybody out.
It's
And
equal opportunity accountability.
yes, straight. And it's so much so that it pisses people off on both sides.
Sure.
And what happened to the greatest criminal justice reformer of all time? They straight up killed him.
Yeah, they literally crucified him.
Right. And he never wronged anybody other than calling people out for what they were doing. You know what I mean? And it's tattered through our history, right? Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, JFK, like all these people who came out and was just like calling people out for what they were doing, they straight up got killed for it. And so it's a dangerous road. Like ugly grace is very dangerous because I'm probably giving grace to people like everybody's idea of who deserves grace is subjective.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm trying to objectively walk into it that whoever is in front of me is going to get that grace. And that pisses people off.
Well,
that's why it's ugly.
We talked about this last week, but just in sticking with the biblical theme, when the apostles come to Jesus and say, well, how many times should I forgive someone? 7 times? And they feel like they're being so generous. And
yes.
Jesus is like, nope, 7 times 70 or 77. And
yes.
I often think when I'm listening to these conversations, I feel a little bit fraudulent because Maz has only been through rehab once. So while our journey to get to that point was arduous, I have not had to test, would I do this again? Yeah. Would I go back into the gates of hell, live there, and watch him walk out and have the same amount of faith over and over and over again?
That's a tricky one.
And I'm not wishing that. So universe, do not hear me saying, oh, I'd love to see how good I can be.
Let's not do that.
But I feel like for me personally, I extended a lot of ugly grace. and I don't know that I could do it over and over again.
Yeah.
And so then that creates a little feeling of like, are you being totally honest about all this then? Because it's not easy to do.
Yeah, it's not. And the question that I get a lot, usually by people who have been victims of something, right, is would you, Adam, be able to provide ugly grace to somebody who did this to you,
Yeah.
right? The beautiful thing about that question is, one, I hope I could.
Yep.
I really do. I mean, let's take it to the extreme, because that's what people usually do when we have this conversation. Would you be able to have ugly grace on someone who murdered your daughter?
Yeah.
Right. And I'm going to tell you a story, and it gets me emotional when I think about it, because ugly grace is truly beautiful when it happens, right? There's this pastor, his name's Ed Martin, actually. I'm not related to him. He gave a story. He's in recovery, really long-term recovery. He's not alive anymore. He used to be a circuit speaker, and he gave this Ed Munum, sorry, not Martin, Ed Munum. You have to Google him and listen to his talk, but he gave a talk about how in his recovery walk, he had to go back and make amends to a lot of people because of the things that he had done, right? But there was no real process for people who had done things to him, right? And his father was murdered by this man who is sitting life sentence in prison. Ed went to the prison and wanted to forgive him because it was holding him back from going to the next level in his own recovery. And he went there and he was filled with emotions, the thoughts of like, I'm being taken advantage of. I'm being manipulated, and I'm manipulating myself. Like, he would just have all these thoughts telling him not to do it. And he sat in the visiting booth with the phone across from him, and he told him exactly who he was. And he's like, I just want you to know that I forgive you. Now, here's where the ugly grace is. That guy paroled, had nowhere to go, and Ed let him live in his house. This pastor who was preaching grace knew, like, I know because I preach this, that there's going to come a time that my faith is going to be tested more than others. I know the day is coming. It almost makes me want to not do it because I know I'm in the spotlight. I know that there's a lot of people that know me. I know that I preach this. I think that there's going to be a day that comes that I'm going to be tested on that in front of a lot of people with something that really, really bad happens to me. And I hope when that day comes, like, my whole journey right now is getting ready for that day. Right. And I hope the worst case scenario, something happens to me like that, I'm not ready for it, I'm not in a good place in my recovery, and I start drinking again. Right. So number one, that right there is the other side of proving that there's work I need to do. And if I'm going, like, I need to be ready for any certain trials and tribulations that are going to come in my future, because my go-to is to drink. Right. And if I don't do it correctly, I'm going to drink, which proves even more that there's work that needs to be done for ugly grace. On the other side of it is that I will be able to, like, I'll be proven right. Because if I apply that ugly grace to whatever that bad situation is, and I don't drink and I become whole, right, it will literally prove that all the preaching was worth it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I hope it never happens.
Jonah and the whale, Adam.
Yeah.
Yeah. It keeps me up at night thinking about that moment that could happen to me, that could make or break my whole life.
Yeah.
I see it happen all the time. Like, I messaged a girl last night. I'm trying to build up monthly donations for F5 at like $20, like think about it. I saw this on TikTok. It was like, if you had 1 million followers and all of them sent you $1, you'd be like a millionaire. I could do a lot of greatness with $1 million sitting in the F5 bank account, and like create treatment centers and youth initiatives and all that stuff. I would be a complete awesome steward of money, because money has no value to me. It only has a purpose.
Yeah.
Right. And so, anyways, so I was talking to this girl last night, and she's like, she was like, if I had $1 million, I would give it to you. But I just lost my husband. He was killed. And my daughter's 2 months old. Right. And I have 3 other kids. And I was just like, man, and she was still thinking that she wanted to support us. Right. That's Ugly Grace heart. Right.
Wow.
And I told her, if you send me any money, I'm sending it back. I don't want, like, what can I do to support you?
Yeah.
Right. And she kept, and then I found out she lives across the street from one of the F5 houses, and she's had nothing but amazing, like, she's seen nothing but amazingness come out of that house. And what she said was, I wish that my husband would have met you. Right. Because the reason he went down that path or whatever, it all happened is because of drug abuse.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm just like, man, you never know who's watching. You don't know who you're going to talk to.
Absolutely don't. That is the truest thing to say. Well, Adam, this has been
brilliant.
Yeah.
It really
Yeah,
has.
this is great.
What's your website, Adam?
F5project.org.
F5project.org. Don't think about supporting it. Go support it. Because this is the only thing I want to say. I think it would be great if we all walked the walk. But there are people already walking it, so support them. That is a valid way to do it. We don't all need to start programs like F5. We all need to support programs like F5 and plug in where we can as we are on our own journey.
Yes.
And so, going back to we don't need more nonprofits. If this has inspired you, don't start a nonprofit. Reach out to Adam and figure out how you can support Adam's work. And if the first thing you think is, well, I would do it better, send Adam money anyway and see if he does it better with more money. That's, that's the best way to do it.
Directors.
Yeah, or provide critical feedback that's useful and show up. It's easy to be the one who says, well, I would do it differently. Then do it.
Yeah.
I don't care what you would do. I care what you are doing.
Yeah.
So,
I end with like this, like whenever I come in contact with people like that, I tell them to do it, right? Yeah. Like go out and do it. And in the 5 years of me telling people to go out and do it, I've yet to see one do it.
Yeah. It's so easy to criticize.
Yeah.
It's way harder to do it. And the minute you have to do it, you see why it's so hard to do it.
Right.
Yeah. Adam, I hope we can stay in touch. This has been amazing.
Thank you. And thank you for everything you're doing as well.
Yeah. Congrats on being your recovery, dude. Next time you guys go out or whatever and you have your cool, like, non-alcoholic beer, I'll grab a soda. I'll kick it with you.
We'll make that happen.
I'd love to make that happen. I'll actually drink soda.
That'd be cool.
To be honest.
Yeah.
All right, Adam. Thanks so
Thank you
much.
so
We'll
much.
talk to you soon. Everybody else, we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.